Welcome to LFN News, a production of LFN Media, bringing you the latest in celebrity news, with specific analysis to keep you in the know of what is going on around you. Although the R. Kelly Chicago trial was the biggest fail in the government's R. Kelly Fails book, it never should have taken place in the first place. The entire trial was in itself one of the biggest government scams of the modern-day justice system. This was a well-orchestrated effort by prosecution, with direct support from the feds, intended to justify their initial mistakes in the New York trial and the fear of an impending appeal. There is not much that one has to say to expose the injustice and prejudice that was portrayed in Chicago, in a case that never should have been, resulting from a fake indictment, but we are just gonna try break it down further for those that might have conveniently chosen to overlook the facts, and assume that we have an incorruptible justice system, as we have so largely marketed ourselves to the globe. Firstly, the case itself was based on an illegal indictment, that was crafted and imposed on mere hearsay without any proof whatsoever. Since when has our justice system depended on a mere documentary series, that pooled mere stories from some of the best actors in the land, as evidence to warrant an indictment? Let's shed a little more light on this, shall we? Anyone who has had any basic legal advice knows too well that, if there is not enough basic evidence to insinuate that a person could have committed a crime, then they can't be indicted. The key word here is evidence. In fact, an indictment in itself is a formal accusation, based upon available evidence, that a person has committed a serious crime. We can't help but wonder, what evidence was based on for R. Kelly's Chicago indictment? This, however, wasn't the first time the feds were making a glaring mistake in relation to R. Kelly's Chicago accusations. Starting in the 1990s, journalists were conniving with alleged victims of Kelly, accusing him of allegedly abusing young fans. Following the undue pressure, the Cook County State's attorney at the time indicted Kelly in 2002 on vague, unsupported charges. Following the clear lack of evidence, it took prosecutors more than 6 years to get the R&B King into court in lieu of their bogus indictment, but it only took a few hours for a jury to declare him not guilty on all 14 counts against him. One critical detail from the 2008 trial that guided the craft in this recent Chicago trial is the fact that in 2008, the presiding judge allowed a forensics expert to examine the tape, which was the central piece of evidence in the trial, also allowing them to testify on the stand in that regard. This was equally central in the jury's decision for acquittal, something that must have set a precedent for this latest Chicago trial. It was evident the tape was a fake on the onset. All the forensic video expert had to do was make a version of the tape, in which he put a background of the log cabin room in Kelly's home on a loop, then placed the man and the girl on the tape in a superimposed layer, and then made their heads disappear. This, he said, only took him a few hours of work over a few afternoons, and yet it showed, with great conviction, how such a tape could easily be faked. It is no wonder that when the motion to have forensics examine the tapes in this recent trial was moved, presiding Judge Harry Leinenweber did not shy away from openly and bluntly rejecting the motion, without any valid excuse whatsoever. This brings us to the other irregularity in this Chicago trial. There were no tapes. Yes. No credible tapes for that matter. It was determined earlier on in the trial, that the tapes that were being displayed in the trial were fabricated. How the jury felt pressured to rule on evidence that was never verified by any professional, remains a myth to this day. Judge Harry clearly earned himself a reputation in this trial. You may think he is confident his retirement is fast approaching, but is it? No judge with such a reputation under his belt would ever opt for such a compromising undertaking, unless there was something out of this world in it for them. We just might never know what, but one thing we are so sure of as the light of day, is there were no tapes. A former private investigator, the close to any qualified expert we had step on the witness stand, actually confessed that he was certain the central tape was merely fabricated, having affirmed that the feds took bits and pieces of several pieces of video, and put them together into a kind of mixed tape, making it inappropriate for the evidence desk. Both prosecution and the feds in Chicago seemed to disregard the most basic of video evidence rules. It should be noted that, in order for photo and video evidence to be admissible in court, it must meet two basic requirements: relevance and authenticity. In order for evidence to be relevant, it must have probative value. In other words, it must either support or undermine the truth of any point at issue in the legal proceedings. Another glaring irregularity in the Chicago trial is the fact that there were no real victims in the trial. Yes. None of the alleged victims that took the stand in the Chicago trial did so without the cover of an immunity deal. What could they have been running away from? This was utter proof that the alleged victims were no angles themselves. They definitely had their own skeletons in the closet that they needed safely hidden. They basically had been licensed to lie, as they were not obligated in any way to tell the truth as is required by law. Which of their stories were we to believe then? Some went on to confess that they had actually lied before the jury before. What would compel them to tell the truth this time round? It's a whole paradox. The decision by the feds to actually offer immunity deals to the alleged victims was probably the biggest error in their strategy in Chicago. It's no wonder that even the jury, which had been arm twisted to the limit, still found the testimony of one way too fabricated to defend. It is common knowledge that anyone who testifies in court under oath is ordered and demanded to tell the truth, and nothing but the truth. Perjury, which is simply disobeying this court order to tell only the truth, can result into serious penalties. But more than half of the prosecution's key witnesses in Chicago were actually shielded from this with immunity deals. How inappropriate. One alleged victim even failed to show for the trial. Whatever this tells us about the prosecution is not for the good books. It sends off signals that probably all the alleged victims were pressured into their assumed positions for the sole purpose of affecting the biased motives of the feds, in their attempt to help lock R. Kelly up for a long enough time to fully frustrate his career. These daunting facts will leave anyone who cares to know perplexed at just how far the government is willing to go to effect a vendetta against the star, with whatever motive. One can't help but wonder. There are numerous theories on why the feds would actually want R. Kelly locked away for a long time. Well, in short, the R. Kelly Chicago trial was just like no other. Here is a trial, stemming from an illegal indictment in itself, with no real evidence, and with no real victims whatsoever. By the mere fact that this did not result into an acquittal, nor a mistrial, but rather a mixed verdict, with most of the guilty verdicts basing on the non-verified tapes that were merely presented without any expert's opinion on their authenticity. Well, what's done is done, but even though we are still yet to see the sentencing, it is glaringly evident that this is a very appealable verdict, just like R. Kelly's lead attorney, Jennifer Bongine, stressed in her public statement right after the verdict. That's all we had for you today. Please let us know in the comment section below if there is any other fact that you can point at that greatly compromised this trial's credibility. We value your honest opinion. Thank you for watching LFN News, a production of LFN Media, giving you another view of issues at hand. To get notified whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now and hit the notification icon, and remember to give us your comment on the subject matter below.